so we went over and we said, hey, you downloaded rocks? And he said, yeah. And so he let us use them, and that's what you see in the picture.
That's so cool.
So they were, whatever that Star Trek movie that came out that year was, that's from that movie.
That's a great story, thank you.
So Mr. Spock did us a solid.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
When writing music for the Idols, how much of a role did Bob Squillick have with that?
How much of a what?
A role, like as far as writing, or is he,
Get a little more specific about that.
like, was he more just a
Who's he?
Bob Squillick?
Oh, no, Bob was, he came in, what he did was fantastic, but the stuff was written before he came in.
Oh, okay.
So, but he, an extraordinary guitar player. When he came in, I told him, I said, I do not want one gratuitous note on this record. I want everything we put on this record to have meaning. And to his credit, I nicknamed him 3-Day because when we did the solo for the Idol, it took 3 days to do that solo. I mean, we would not settle until we got what we thought was perfection. And at the end of those 3 days, his fingers were literally bleeding. And I mean, we were putting in 8 hours a day, and I don't care how much of a seasoned guitar player you are, you play that long for that many days in a row, and your fingers are gonna literally look like they've been in a grinder, but to his credit, he never once complained. I think he understood from the get-go, once he had heard the early incarnations of what we were doing, he understood the record, and he was totally into it. So the irony is that where that studio was, it was destroyed in the 1994 earthquake. So we lost the studio, but the Hollywood Forever Cemetery is a block away, and Bob's buried there now. So it's one of those ironic, one of those ironies that you work somewhere and you never dream, you'll end up right next door. Yes, sir.
Question about the Wild Child video shoot. If you could just share anything on that, like where it was shot, or the concept.
It was done at a place called Red Rock State Park out in California, and nobody notices because the guys that did the set design were so good. The set design is actually made out of styrofoam. And they literally went in, and I don't know how they do it these days, but in those days, they would cut the styrofoam with jumper cables. They would hook it up to a 12-volt battery, and they would literally short it out, and they would cut the styrofoam from the heat that was coming off the jumper cables. And they could mold it, and they could make it look like anything they want, and then they paint it later. And we put it up against the mountainside behind us, and standing from me to you couldn't tell it was a part of the mountain.
Right.
I mean, it was amazing looking.
Yeah,
So those guys, they did a fantastic job, and we were on that. I think it took us 3 days to do that shoot, but I think it was the end of November when we did it. And it was freezing when we were out there. The part where it's nighttime, where I come up to the graveyard scene, you see me ride up on the bike. You can see my breath coming out of my nose, so that's cold when it does that.
Right.
Yes, sir.
What's your favorite band you've ever toured with?
I don't know. We've been very fortunate to have had some really good experiences. So I don't know if I could narrow it to any one band. It's when you're working with professionals, it can be difficult sometimes. You get guys that are prima donnas, but we've been pretty lucky. So I don't think I could single any one out. Yes.
How's it feel when you have multi-generational showing up to your shows? Grandfathers, fathers, grandsons?
First time I saw that, I was watching Frank Sinatra. This was back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And I remember he was probably in his 60s then at the time. And I remember, they would scan the audience, and I remember thinking to myself, because I'd never seen anything like that before. And I thought, this is pretty incredible. You know, what do you have to do something like that? Well, first of all, the music has to span those generations. But that was the first time I ever saw anything like that. And as, you know, rock has aged, we're seeing it more and more. You know, so it, every time I see it, it always reminds me of that Sinatra thing. You know, because I'd never seen anybody do that before him. But I'll tell you a funny story. He was in the studio at Capitol Records, and Capitol's got a studio down in the basement. And some of my tapes were in the studio, and I needed to go down and get them. And you know what? I'm not going to finish this story.
Come on.
You guys are recording, so it might not be the best thing to do. It might get me in trouble. But let's just say they were less than receptive for me to go in. I got them, but it didn't. It wasn't the most pleasant experience. Yes, sir.
You ever met that celebrity that took your breath away, starstruck, for example, like Johnny Cash or whoever? Just
Sure. Sure. First one was Ali. You know, and the ironic part about that is I got to be kind of friends with him. You know, and he got the biggest kick. Whenever I'd come around, he'd call himself Whitey, and he'd call me Blackie. He got the biggest kick out of that, you know. But it's funny, you know, you do this, what we've done for so long, and you get to meet a lot of people, and sometimes, you know, they befriend you, and you kind of forget who they are sometimes until they do something or say something, and it triggers your memory, and then you realize, oh wow, this is that person. You know, because we were in a thing one time, 60 Minutes had come to interview him, and so it was Ed Bradley that did the interview with him, and it's all day long, they're asking him questions. He gets a craving for rice pudding. And so finally somebody sent out and they got some rice pudding, and we're sitting there, and he gets it, and I said, you know, he's a Southern boy, so he knows what rice pudding is, right? And I said, how is it? And he held up his fingers like that. It meant it wasn't very good. He hands me the spoon. I took a bite out of it, and as I'm chewing, I realized I just ate off the spoon of the greatest. Those things will trigger your memory when that happens, because while it's happening, you don't think about it, and then you go, oh shit, this is him. You know, now if somebody would have told me when I'm 7 years old, sneaking a transistor radio into my bed to listen to him fight Sonny Liston because my dad wouldn't let me stay up and watch the fight, you're never going to believe you're ever going to have a moment like that. And then it happens, and you know, a lot of times it ends up being very cool. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
First off, you're one of my bucket list bands, so thank you.
Thank you.
That I get to see you. And I always try to tell this to any artist I meet, but I've been sober over 5.5 years, and it's music like yours that I can listen to on a daily basis that gives me that motivation and drive to do it. But my question is going to be, through the years, as your right before you go on stage, your routine that you do, has it changed throughout the years greatly, or is it still pretty much?
Socks. All ball players do it. You know, I played baseball growing up, you know, come close to doing it for a living. The ritual that I did then, and most athletes will tell you the same story. They have a ritual that they go through when they get dressed, because every piece of clothing you put on, it takes you a mental step closer to what you're getting ready to do. So and it was funny because I read something just a couple of months ago. George Harrison said the same thing. He said when they would go in, you know, they were dressed in their street clothes, but by the time they put on their little Beatle suits, especially by the time they got to the Beatle boots, they were the Beatles. You know, so I understand that. You know, like I said, it's a ritualized thing, and you know, like I said, every athlete will probably tell you the same story. Yes, sir.
What do you do in your off
I don't have any. I really don't, you know, but I play with cars, you know, when I get time, but I don't have as much time as I would like. Especially the last 2 years, you know, going through the rehab and all that stuff. It's, rehab's a lonely business, man. You know, and nobody can walk you through it but yourself, you know, so, but we're getting there, you know, we're doing better. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. So first time I saw you guys was on the last Command tour with Kiss. So just wondered, do you have any good Kiss stories you can share?
Yeah, probably, but I'm sure I'd have to think about it for a while. I mean, you know, I go way back with those guys.
Right.
You know, so, I mean, we saw a lot of stuff, you know. Probably, you know, I've been working on a book for 3 years. And one of the things that I realized when I started writing the book is how much their presence and my relationship to them more, well, you say, you know, when we were touring together. Right now, I can't think of an incident where there's anything in the book that's related to that. Most of it is more personal, you know, but it really led to a lot of my development because I was there watching that thing get born and see them go from making $70 a week, which was a big deal to us back then. You know, when you're collecting Coke bottles to get into to happy hour to buy 25-cent beers, which is what we did, you know, making $70 a week back then, that was huge, you know, and then watch them go literally in an 18-month period from being almost done. I mean, I called Ace one day, I would talk to them about once a month and just, you know, follow up on what they're doing. This is like the first year and a half I'm talking now. And I think they were in Indiana somewhere. And I said, how's it going? He says, not so good. He goes, shows are going great, but he says, we're expecting a call any day to tell us to come home. Everybody's broke. And then Rock and Roll All Night hit at radio a few months after that, and the rest is history, but that's how close it came for you to never hear from them again. You know, so, you know, the old expression, destiny's been changed by missing a bus. You know, well, for them it was a song catching fire on the radio. Yes, sir.
I've been hooked on Wasp ever since the first album. And one thing that's really drawn me to the band is that crunchy, raw, in-your-face guitar sound. And even the live shows were always, every show just has that perfect guitar tone. But on Still Not Black Enough, did you record something different or not use amps and run straight through the mixer? Because the guitars made some great songs on there, but the guitars sound wimpy to me. I
did an experimental thing on that. I recorded the whole album through a tape recorder. And it was an old Sony reel-to-reel tape recorder that had a 6x9 speaker, like you'd see in the dash of an old 50s or 60s car, you know, those 6x9 speakers. And it had those built in on the sides. And I still think this sounds kind of interesting. You know, might not be your favorite, but I just, there was a compression that came out of it. Because basically, to get an amplifier to break up, and this is all geek, rock and roll, guitar player stuff here. To get an amplifier to break up, you have to overdrive it. And so in other words, you gotta put 5 pounds of potatoes in a 2-pound bag. That's how you get the sound. And with using that tape recorder, it broke up almost instantly. And then I heard, it was interesting, because while I was doing it, I read something that Brian May said, that he had done something very, very similar. And there was a lot of, we refer to it as English mid-range. There's a honkiness. It's kind of like wonk, wonk, you know, that frequency that's between 1,000 and 2,000 hertz. And it's a very English type of thing. And he was going for that. And when I plugged it into that tape recorder, I listened to it. I thought, this is unique sounding. Do you know anything about old Vox amps? Mm-hmm. Well, it was reminiscent to a Vox amp, you know, so. I tried it on that one record, and I never did it again after that, but I thought it was kind of neat.
Yeah, there's some great songs on there.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I didn't really have a question until this gentleman mentioned Kiss. Do you have any interest in doing cruises like they did? We'd all be there.
That's for sure.
It's been offered to us, but those boats to me are like being in jail. You know, it's a floating prison. And
It's a lot of fun, it's a lot of fun.
well, I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
First of all, welcome back.
Thank you.
I can't imagine the road you've been through, but it's just awesome we get to be back here with you. So I'm kind of jealous I didn't get to be in New York with your recent show, but pretend Donald Trump walked in this room right now. What position would you want to be on his cabinet? What seat would you want for his cabinet? Very good. Thank you. I like it.
You're catching me flat-footed. The courage that it takes to do what they've done is extraordinary. And, you know, but when we did what we did Saturday night, it wasn't just about him, it was about America.
Yeah, it's free speech.
Right. And, you know, we knew before we did it, because we weighed the idea back and forth for a week before we did it. You know, what would we do, you know, if there was going to be fallout? And I said, well, it doesn't matter if there's fallout, because when you see big tech censorship, it's the same thing we were going through 40 years ago. It's just, it's got a different name on it now, that's all. You know, so the first thing any government does when they seize power is they seize the airwaves. You know, because we know that if you can censor speech, you can control thought eventually. You know, and we see it time after time. Or even if you don't control the thought to the degree you like, you cower people so that, you know, they're like little rabbits, you know, hiding in the corner. You know, they're afraid to speak out, you know. So that was the big reason behind it, you know, but looking at someone, you know, who's willing to go through what the guy did. Well, I mean, I heard somebody say yesterday, he said he's got big brass ones. And I thought, yep, that's very true, because, you know, Thomas Jefferson said, the tree of liberty must be replaced from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. And I see him as a patriot. And when I was saying what I was saying the other night, you know, there's two things I was interested in, which was censorship and patriotism. You know, so if somebody's willing to die for what they believe in, I gotta stand there with them. You know, so what position would I hold? I think I'll just leave that to those guys, because, you know, I got a full-time job doing what I'm doing. Yes, sir, in the back.
Have you ever thought about doing like an acoustic show?
Doing a what show?
Acoustic show, like stripped down?
Yeah, we have. I mean, we've thought about doing the Idol in its entirety,
Oh, that'd be awesome.
but it would be a little different than you might think. And I won't go into detail what it's going to be, but we've had this idea for 10 years. And the best way I could put it would be to say, think of it as a one-man show. But it would not be exactly what you think. But if it's on my list of things to do, because what we would do is we would do it similar to the way we're doing this. We'd limit it to about 100 to 200 people a night. Because one of the things I would want to do, because we have, in our world, we have what I call the fuck like a beast people and the Crimson Idol people. And a lot of times they don't cross over. They can be two separate audiences sometimes. For the people that want to do that, they are extremely enthusiastic about it. So what I would want to do would be to do the record in its entirety and then have an hour to 2 hour Q&A after it, you know, to really get into the meat and potatoes of where it came from, how it worked, and all that stuff. And we'd probably do it in maybe 15 to 20 cities around the world, maybe. You know, so it's definitely something that's on the to-do list.
Can you put Cleveland on the list?
But,
Leave it on that list.
well, it would obviously be the big ones, you know, New York, LA, London, and stuff like that. But what we would have to do is we would have to determine where we think it would play best.
Would you release it though on a DVD or something?
I don't know, because nobody can sell DVDs anymore or live records because of YouTube. So there's not a lot of point to it. We probably would, just for historical purposes, just to have it. Whether we would release it or not, I couldn't tell you. That's a little far down the road right now, you know, so one step at a time. Yes, sir?
So, first off, huge fan of yours. It's great to meet you, by the way. There's a song that I've always wondered. You've only played it, I think, maybe once, maybe twice, I don't know. But it's on Live and Raw, and it's The Manimal. How come have you not played that ever since?
When we put a tour together, we go to the studio, we got a blackboard in the studio. And there's about, at any given time when we're ready to do a tour, we'll put up 50 songs on that blackboard. And we have to narrow it down as to what we think. We take an average of what we think people want to hear. And there's been songs that I've wanted to do for a long time that we've never gotten around to do. Because again, I've seen artists go out and do things that were obscure, and that becomes incredibly self-indulgent. You know, when you got 10 people in the room, you're gonna have 10 different opinions as to what they think you should play. So what you have to do is you have to take an average of what you think people want to hear. And so because of that, there's a lot of things that just don't end up making the cut. And like I said, for me personally, it can be frustrating at times, but, you know, based on, you know, people that are coming, you have to, I feel as an artist, you have to cater to that. Yes, ma'am?
I was reading a book, it's called The Untold Story of Alice of James. And Layne was a big fan of yours and covered Love Machine in his first band. And I just kind of wanted a fun story. Who is a fan that shocked you? That surprised you?
I would think that it comes probably more from non-musical sources.
Okay.
You know, politicians, guys in the Pentagon, stuff like that. You know, it's just, and I don't know why it should be surprising to me, because they listen to music like anybody else.
Right.
You know,
right.
but you don't think of them, you know, they come up to you with a three-piece suit on, you know, and hey man, and they start telling stories like you guys are telling now. And, you know, it amuses me.
Yeah.
You know, but like I said, it comes from, for me, it's those sources more than the music sources.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Have you had any Spinal Tap type moments on while traveling?
When that movie came out, Rod and I went to the premiere, and I kid you not, and I cannot over-exaggerate what I'm getting ready to say. It was at the Directors Guild in Hollywood. There was a guy, Rod was sitting on the end of the aisle, I was sitting next to him. Across the aisle, you've heard the expression rolling in the aisle. The guy across the way was down on his knees in the aisle, laughing. The whole audience was howling, and Rod and I were both sitting there like this. It was not funny to us at all, you know, and I remember, you know, when Cherie and I did the commercial for it, she called me up and she says, you know, I got this movie thing I'm doing, do you want to do part of it? I was broke at the time, so, you know, it was before we had a record deal, and I said, sure, whatever. And I go down there and I recognize all the guys, but, you know, we were having a board meeting first. So Michael McKeon, you know, from Laverne and Shirley, you know, I recognize him, Harris Shearer, all them. But they were dressed in their street clothes, you know, so we have this meeting, and, you know, okay, this is what we're gonna do, and, you know, let's get started next week, or whatever it was. And I walked in, and So, you know, I was ready to do my thing, but they were finishing a scene, and they were in makeup, and they come walking out with all that get up on. I was stunned. I mean, I couldn't believe, and they were all in character, and they're all talking in English accents. I mean, Mike McKeon and Chris Guest are from Staten Island. They don't have English accents, you know. And to listen to them and look at them, it was pretty remarkable. I mean, these guys, they're professional actors, you know, so that's what they do, you know. But yeah, it was an interesting experience to say the least. Yes, sir.
All right, so I actually have two questions. One of them's serious and one of them's fun, if you can answer one of them. So at the end of the track of On Your Knees, you say, "What the fuck is that?" Do you recall what caused you to say that, or is there a story behind that?
That's his question. See, he didn't get that far.
Yeah, I mean, would you be able to answer that?
Studios traditionally have lead in the walls, and it's there to keep out RF interference, radio frequencies, like CB radios and things like that. Well, this studio that I was in, it had 3 of the 4 walls. You're supposed to line the walls and the ceilings or the roofs to keep out RF frequencies. And I found out later that all the walls were lined except for one. Well, that's where this radio frequency came in. It was some Mexican radio station in Southern California. And the guy's like, Oliva, Oliva! You know, and it's like, and I'm hearing this in my headphones, right? But they don't hear it in the control room. I'm the only one that hears it, but I think it's going on tape. So needless to say, that was my knee-jerk reaction as to what was that, you know, and they didn't know what I was talking about. So it never went on tape. You only hear one side of the conversation, which is me. You know, and we thought it was kind of funny, so we left it.
And the second one is a fun one, like I said. If you could
I thought the first one was the fun one.
If you could create a super group with fellow musicians that you know, I mean, what kind of music would you think you would do? Would you play the bass or would you do the guitar part?
I have no idea.
No idea.
Yeah, I mean, that would have to be something, and that's the fun question.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, that you might admire through the years, you know.
Yeah, but that's all that fantasy stuff that's never gonna happen.
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
why.
so, you know, and depending on the day you'd ask me, I'd give you a different answer, you know, so I couldn't answer that. Anybody else? That's it? All right, I'm going to work.
We're stars.
What's that?
We're stars. A little bit about that?
There was an open bar. Oh. Man, it's a good thing you didn't have evil intent. All right.
Do you have a question? I just want to know what was the inspiration behind Forever Free?
A couple of somebodies we knew who didn't make it. And it was, I wouldn't say it's autobiographical, you know, or biographical rather, but my best friend got killed. And I'm 18 years old. He's in a car accident and gets both of his legs cut off. And he bleeds out. You're 18 years old, and I was pallbearer at his funeral. And you're holding on the rail, you know, the box is about the size of this table. And you're holding on the rail of that box, and you're thinking, my buddy's in that box. I ain't never seen him again. That's tough at any age, but 18, and it stinks. And him and I were tight. You know, his birthday was the day after mine, and he never got to see anything I went on to do or anything like that. I'm sure he would have been thrilled for me. But you know, about him and another girl that I knew. So, yes, that's it. All right, that was easy. Now I'm going to work. All right, guys.
Thank you, Blackie.